All right. Welcome, Gabriela, to the Biohacker Babes. We are so excited to have you today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's so exciting to be here, especially with the little backstory that you gave me.
Yeah, so for our audience, I was just telling Gabriela, I've been following her work for I think around 14 years. And that's a long time in the health space. So when your name popped up in our email inbox, it was immediately, yes, we have to have you on our show. So it's an honor to finally have you on.
So exciting.
We're going to be talking about fertility today, and I think there's still a lot of misconceptions, and as we were talking about before we hit record, a lot of misinformation, especially with the rise in social media, podcasting, all the things. So we want to help spread the correct information because you've been in this space for a very long time. Yeah. And you have helped a lot of couples that have maybe tried every, quote unquote, everything. They've tried all the supplements, the diets, the biohacks, and they're still not able to conceive. So to kick us off, what do you think is the biggest blind spot for these quote unquote healthy couples that still can't get pregnant?
Yeah. Look, I think that's a really great question. And I'll start by saying this. We as humans want simple solutions to complex problems, right? And and I think that's where our trouble begins, because you see, what's easy is getting pregnant for about 96.3% of people within 2 years. And so, that's easy. Most people will have sex, get pregnant, have a baby. We're no longer having this conversation. It's moving on to the next stage of life. The people who don't are the people who essentially are kind of left behind by the system, you see, because what ends up happening is that within a year of not getting pregnant, you're being told, well, you are running out of time, because usually by that stage, women are over 35 and they start to be told this message, which, by the way, is bollocks, that you're running out of time, blanket statement. In 25 years of doing this work, having helped hundreds of thousands of people, I can say that your AMH is a proxy at best marker of your ability to conceive, even when it's low, even when it's under 1. If your FSH is still under 10 at baseline, you still have probably between 2 to 5 years to be able to have a baby. Now, that is not to say that you should be wasting cycles. And I think that most people, they do things that they think are going to be helpful and that they think are moving the needle forward, but it's really just putting perfume on a pig. It's still going to be a pig, like you can take the astaxanthin and the this and the that and keep smoking and keep, drinking alcohol and keep not sleeping properly. And guess what? You're still going to be taking a pill that's going to have minimal effect on the overall thing that you're actually wanting to achieve. So it's almost like, creating a hierarchy of effect, first of all, in our minds, to understand that if you don't have the big rocks in place first, you are always going to be chasing some kind of miracle cure that does not exist. And most people who struggle to conceive, guess what? We become completely obsessed and overwhelmed and frustrated, and we start hearing things where we just hope for that to be the answer and the solution. And so, you go on the rabbit holes of the internet of figuring out, should I take this? Should I do that? And most of it is really just, I'll often say, if there's 1,000 things that will help you improve your fertility, most people are doing 879 of them, but not the 3 that move the needle. And so this is one of the big issues that people have when they're struggling with conception. And if we just go back very quickly to that statistic that I gave, which is, 4% of people actually struggle to conceive and take home a healthy baby. But what happens is that these days people are becoming obviously more boisterous about it. There's just a lot more speaking about it. It used to be so taboo. When I started doing this work 25 years ago, you would see patient on the internet talking about the inner workings of their ovaries. Like that just wasn't a thing, right? Whereas today, I literally I get all of those accounts, you know, because of obviously being on Instagram. And, you know, I just keep getting retargeted for these accounts. And I kind of go like, wow, people really are sharing a lot these days, you know. But the thing about that, and I think that this is one of the really big things that we need to kind of like orient ourselves about, is that what happens in the fertility space, in the fertility industry, because this is an industry, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry through the whole IVF process, is that most clinics these days are backed by private equity. So the only way in which patients actually get support is you're struggling to conceive, you go to your GP, they will do the basic healthcare system standard tests, which is check fallopian tubes, check if you're ovulating, check if you have a uterus and you can house a pregnancy, and if you're lucky, do a semen analysis. After those 4 tests, most people are told, yep, everything is normal, just keep trying. And so after a year of that, by the way, infertility is the only diagnosis that is self-given by a length of time. Do you go to your doctor and say, I think I have cardiovascular disease, and they take your word for it? No, they don't. You know, they go and do multiple tests to ascertain your cardiovascular health, your cardiovascular disease, and your cardiovascular risk. In infertility, none of that happens. It's basically, hey, I've been trying for 12 months. I haven't gotten pregnant. Okay, here you go. You have an infertility diagnosis. You do 4 tests. Oh, now it's unexplained infertility, as if that's a diagnosis, you know, and you kind of go like, what the hell? So that's just a little intro on the big problem that we're tackling here today.
That's a great intro on the problem. And I'm really excited to talk about these 3 big rocks, because I'm sure people are like, I'm overwhelmed. Like, please just, again, tell me the simple solution. But that's so interesting that you mentioned that it's not a diagnosis. I know you've said like infertility is a signal, and I love that, because when I learned about health being a signal, everything in your body being a signal, everything like clicked. The way that I work with clients and patient outcomes, if we just think about the body as a signal, this makes so much sense. So what is the signal when a woman is trying to conceive, and if they are deemed infertile by self-diagnosis, what is the body trying to communicate in an infertile state?
That they're even in balance, right? That there are obstacles that are getting in the way, because quite simply, the body is made to reproduce. Like, it just should happen. Right? And so what happens is that, and mind you, it's a miracle that it ever happens for anybody, because in any given cycle, you have a 20% chance of getting pregnant, right? So it's a miracle that any of us are here, but that aside, it happens, biological imperative. And so what the main thing that we need to understand is that when it's not happening, there are things, and it's not, you know, I mentioned the 3 things, and, you know, obviously there's 3,000 things, but the reality is that you have to find what it is, the number one thing for that person. And I always, in my clinic, I always start through proper diagnoses, because that is the one thing that I understand so intrinsically after having done this work for so many years, is that you cannot solve a problem you don't know you have. You know, I'll tell you stories of patients of mine who you think it's pretty straightforward. Like, I had a couple once, they came to me, they were trying for 14 years. For the first 6 years of them trying, they basically were like, in fact, the first 8 years of them trying, they were just like, you know what, let's just keep having sex, and hopefully that's just going to happen one day. After 8 years, and she was a pharmacist, so, you know, after 8 years, she's like, okay, we better start getting treatment, because, you know, this hasn't happened. So let's go and get some more investigations, get some more treatment, and see how we go. So she ended up doing 6 cycles of IUI that did not work. And at that point, the doctor's saying, all right, you guys need to do IVF, because clearly IUI isn't the thing. They went and did 2 cycles of IVF. Now, need I remind you that a cycle of IVF in the United States is between $15,000 to $30,000 per cycle, right? So not everybody can afford to just go and do IVF, you know, and it's huge. And so they went and they did their 2 cycles. And mind you, that's the financial cost of IVF, the physical, emotional, relational, cost of IVF is immensely more than the money. But that's aside for now. And so they did their 2 IVF cycles, both failed. Literally, they were now being told, oh, it's your eggs, you're too old. And I'm thinking, what? Like, she wasn't old 14 years ago, so what happened? You know, like, what is going on here? So anyway, we start our workup and, you know, he had low sperm count. So I look at I always assess every case in my clinic. I don't take on couples that I don't think I can get a baby from. That's why we have a 78.8% live birth rate. So, you know, ultimately I assess the case. If I feel that I can help, then I will offer a place in my program. If I don't, I will direct them and guide them whatever other way I think is going to be most beneficial. But the reason that I do that is because I'm actually trying to demonstrate clinical effectiveness with the purpose of creating an alternative solution for couples who, you know, IVF is never going to be either something that they believe in, that they want to do, something that they can afford. And there are better ways, in my opinion, right? I went to Harvard to be able to actually understand how these massive systems work so that we can actually figure out a way to change it. And it's not easy, but it has to start somewhere. And so this is one of the things that we do in the clinic, which is like, okay, it's very different. You know, most people would just take anybody. Like, I don't. But anyway, so I'm having this conversation with them. And I said to him, so did you know that you have a low sperm count? I actually said, did you have any other semen analysis, you know, that you've done before? Is this the only one you've had, you know, a low count on? And he goes, what do you mean? I'm like, what do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean? And he goes, what do you mean a low sperm count? I said, your sperm count is 2 million. You need to have at least 20 million. So that's low. And he goes, oh, I was never told that. I was like, oh. And so here's what happened. And this is an important point. He never saw the result of the semen analysis until I pointed it out. Like, they had the copy. Sometimes people don't even have copies of their results. Like, get a copy of all of your results. Have a file with all of your results. Know your results. Read your results. That is the first number one takeaway of this conversation. But anyway, so they basically, he didn't know. And so I said to him, I said, look, your sperm count is low. It's 2 million. And he said to me, and when he said this, I was like, oh, this problem is way deeper than I thought. He said, oh, the doctor said that was okay.
Well,
and I'm thinking,
was that a fertility expert?
Exactly. And here's what happens. And here's why a doctor, and again, we have to put this in context, he was going to have IVF. For IVF, as long as you have any sperm, that's okay. Now, when a cycle fails and then multiple cycle fails, in my mind, that is not okay, right? And it's clearly not okay when a couple's objective is to deliver a baby as a result of a cycle. But what happens in the fertility industry is that IVF doctors are trained to deliver IVF cycles and have the person survive at the end of it. That pretty much is the job, right? The job is not to uncover why it's not working, why they might need IVF to begin with, because if you're going to treat anyway, why test? That is how the healthcare system operates. That is how the industry operates. And therefore, and patients don't know this. Patients think that they're going to their IVF doctor for their baby. Well, actually, you're going to your IVF doctor to collect eggs. To have those eggs inseminated or, you know, made into embryos, and to have any embryos that are left over transferred. That is what you're going to go and do. And when people have the expectation that their doctor is going to uncover the reason as to why they can't conceive or they can't get pregnant or their cycles keep failing, that's where the first place for major disappointment happens, because the doctor is, most doctors are not interested in understanding the problem. They're interested in delivering the solution, which is a solution for conducting a cycle, not necessarily the further outcome that they want, which is a baby. So that's the thing that's important. So anyway, so when he said to me, you know, the doctor said it's fine. I said, yeah, but not for natural conception. Oh, I was never told that. Oh, okay. So know that you need to have at least 20 million sperm in order to be able to affect natural conception. So anyway, long story short, what ended up happening is that we started working together. I started to assess. We start with very heavy duty diagnostics, really, none of this is secret magical. This is like all the blood test results and, imaging and everything else that is available through your doctor. You just need to know what to ask exactly, specifically what to ask for, how to interpret results, because most people will not know that a TSH at 4 or 5, which is within the quote unquote normal range, is pathological, especially when we're talking about fertility and miscarriage risk. You are going to increase, there are studies, and there is a lot of back and forth on this guideline, of TSH, because of IVF parameters showing, or IVF treatment showing, that there's no difference, or very little difference, or equivocal difference between having a TSH under 2.5 versus above 2.5 and the risk of miscarriage through IVF. But I can tell you something empirically through my clinic, that every single time that I have a woman with recurrent miscarriage who has an TSH, I beg your pardon, above 2.5 and who has been having recurrent miscarriages, gets treated, somehow our miscarriage rate in my program goes from 51.5% before treatment to 13.5% after treatment. That's a massive decrease. And that happens because of addressing little minor factors like this, you see. So most people don't understand how to interpret results. They look at reference ranges, which are very wide population level reference ranges, and don't understand that you shouldn't be looking at lab ranges. You should be looking at optimal ranges. And that is one of the biggest problems with fertility, infertility, and finding a solution to the problem. Scoping that problem properly and effectively and understanding the ins and outs and the nuances is going to be the key difference. And for this couple, once we started to do that, and I started to see, okay, what are the things that were left out? What were the tests that were not done? What were the things that needed to be understood? And of course, there were many things. There was metabolic disease. She had diabetes. We had to improve all of that. But here was the clincher. Both these people, as a couple, both had chlamydia that nobody checked, that nobody picked up. And after 6 failed IUI cycles, 2 failed IVF cycles, we treat the chlamydia with antibiotics for 40 days and everything else. And guess what? When we said to them, okay, now you can start trying, they conceived first attempt after 14 years of infertility.
Wild.
There's so much money spent.
And unfortunately, literally just another day in my office, like literally.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing that makes me so furious. So furious for my patients, because things like that should just never happen.
Yeah, their testing regimen is like child
pathetic.
Yeah, and so I will say, pathetic. So I went through this exact same thing. So 14 years ago, tried for 1 year, didn't conceive, went to one of the top fertility centers in Maryland at the time, and they did all the tests. It was like a quick hormone test. I don't even remember if they told me what day to test the hormones. I don't remember. They did the sperm analysis. They said, unexplained infertility, you have to do IVF. But even with that, it felt like a sales pitch. It was like, you can't do IUI. And I'm like, well, why can't I do IUI? They were like, well, it won't work. I'm like, can you explain why it won't work? And they were like, no, you have to do IVF. Okay, well, why do I need to do IVF? Well, they're like, well, we don't know. So they don't have any answer. And they're just pushing this treatment that's a fortune. But then here's the real kicker. This is what really got me fired up. They had an option. They said you can do 1 cycle for $19,000, or you can do 3 cycles for $32,000. And if the 3 cycles are not successful, you get your money back. I'm like, so now I'm gambling on the success of my IVF, because if you do the $32K and you get pregnant on your first try, then you're like, well, crap, I just wasted a lot of money, but I am pregnant, which is what I wanted. Versus you do the $19K and don't get pregnant, then you're like, well, shoot, I should have done the higher amount.
Isn't that interesting? Isn't it interesting how the incentives are so misaligned? Because look at this,
gambling.
right? It's completely misaligned incentives, because it's like, well, IUI costs $500 in most places, right?
Yeah,
Between
it's so
500, let's
inexpensive.
say $500 to $3,000. Let's just call it that. Okay.
I think mine was like $1,000, and I even said, I don't mind paying the $1,000. Can I just try it? And they said no.
Yeah, so here's the thing. You probably, I mean, you know, we don't know, because I don't know what else was going on in terms of your fertility, but, you know, like when you're younger, like, I mean, 14 years ago, you're probably at your peak fertility years. And
I was 26. I was 26.
Oh, my Lord. Yes, peak fertility years. So it's like, you know, of course, IUI is, as long as we have semi-decent sperm, right, IUI is very likely to actually deliver a healthy baby at that age and stage. But what happens is, it's like there's no incentive for the clinic to go, well, let me offer you something that is less interventional, less intensive, less costly, because that might work for you. You might not need the guns blazing approach of, you know, let's go and inject you with all sorts of drugs for, you know, however many days, and, you know, do surgery to remove eggs, and, you know, like that whole thing. And then on top of that, you get the, okay, well, now let's upsell you into, you know, instead of it being a $19,000 sale, let's make it a $32,000 sale, and make you feel like you're saving, you know, a couple of $10,000 or more. It's like, what? Yeah, look, it's crazy. But anyway, that is what happens. And you see, that's what happens around the world. So imagine, patients are literally, they don't know what to believe and where to go and what to do, because it's this whole conversation of like, well, you know, like they're telling me this is the science, that this is the best thing for me. But then you have to really question that. Is it the best thing for me because it's the best, most profitable thing for the clinic? Or is it because really it's the one thing that's going to make me get pregnant? Now, I know, again, we did a study through the Fertility Breakthrough Program, my program in my clinic, and it was my Harvard thesis for my master's in public health at Harvard. And, you know, what I actually was really interested in was to see, well, who are the people that actually get benefit from this, and what kinds of results they get, right? So we had 544 patients, and we analyzed their results, and we literally found that the program had a 78.8% live birth rate, and 60% of those patients were conceiving naturally, despite even many of them, in fact, almost half, having gone through failed IVF cycles previously. So even though they were told, you need IVF, go do IVF, right? They did IVF, it didn't work. They were like, okay, and sometimes multiple times. And then they're like, okay, you know what? I need to do something else. They go and do something else, and that something else actually helps them get pregnant naturally. Proving the point that they never actually needed IVF to begin with. It was really just that there was no other option through the healthcare system. That was it. You know, so it's just very sad for people, because I do feel like people are being taken for a ride, really.
Truly. Yeah. It's very sad. So there's a lot of healing opportunities. Yes, please.
And I just want to say one thing, and this is not me being against IVF. Like, there are patients who absolutely need IVF, right? And some of them we refer to. We're like, okay, you know what? We've done all the assessments. We've done all of the things that we need to do. And we've made this finding here that tells me that you need IVF. So here, now we're going to prepare you for an IVF cycle. But that is a very different situation to just like, okay, everybody who hasn't conceived in a year, go and do IVF, you know? It's like, that to me is the crazy part. It's not that IVF in itself, IVF is a miraculous tool, a magical, really, scientific discovery. But it really is overused and for profit, you know? So that's my big bug here.
Yeah, and I think that aligns with a lot of problems that people have. They go to conventional medicine, and the first stop is not underlying the root causes that got you there. The first stop is, let's sell you the solution. And it's like, why do more people not know that there's all these steps before that could happen? And I think that's what we really want to educate on and empower people to know. There are opportunities here.
Yes.
And we'll
Yes.
talk more about the opportunities. But I'm really curious to know from you, like, who do you turn away? What are the qualifications that would not qualify someone to come work with you?
It's really interesting because, like, the people that I turn away are simply the people who, for example, there might be this conversation. So you have 2 blocked fallopian tubes, and no, I won't do IVF. I'm like, okay, that I'm good, but I'm not that good. So, that's not going to be something that I can solve. You need IVF. Like, I could certainly treat you to help you have the best possible success rate and, conceive first try. But if you have blocked fallopian tubes and you're not going to do IVF, then I'm sorry, I can't help you. The other is essentially when people come to me and they're menopausal and they're like, oh, but I won't do donor egg. I'm like, okay, immaculate conception was not part of my training. And so I will not be able to assist in this particular endeavor. But, those are the kind of those are the only, or another situation that happens where, I have no sperm and if it's non-obstructive azoospermia, we've obviously there's nothing really much we can do. You need IVF, ICSI, or donor, right? And so those situations where people are, and of course we always take our patients' values and preferences into account. So there are situations where we can still, I've had patients over the years, in fact, oh my God, I laugh because my patients are my biggest teachers, I have to say. There was a lady once who, her and her husband, both FBI agents, and she's like, I'm doing your program. And I'm like, this is not a person I want to take on because I don't think you're going to have a baby. Anyway, long story short, she proved me totally wrong. And she had a baby naturally with her own eggs, despite having not had a cycle for 12 months. She had premature ovarian failure. And so it was I was like, okay, if that's possible, what else is possible? So at that point, I kind of opened a little bit more because until that point, I was like, you know what? I won't even try with somebody who has premature ovarian failure, who has an FSH in the hundreds, who hasn't had a period for a year, because they're not going to have a baby. And in my mind, because she was so I want to do this, and I was like, oh, I don't know. I don't think so. But, I ended up succumbing. And what ended up happening was that in my mind, I felt like, okay, you know what? The worst case scenario here, she's going to be healthier and she's going to have closure. So for me, that was really what drove me to go, okay, let's do this. For her, she was just so clear in her damn self that she was going to have a baby. And I was really wanting to not break her heart, to encourage that, because I really didn't think, it was utterly improbable, right? I was kind of on the border of impossibility, right, in my mind. And then, of course, when that happened, I was like, okay, Gabriela, 1, you are so wrong, delightfully. 2, what else is possible? If that's possible, what else is possible? And so that expanded the conversation for me about okay, maybe in some instances there are ways in which we can test and see. And if somebody is open to donor egg, then that makes me feel comfortable, because it's okay, if natural conception doesn't happen, then I know that they're not joining my program, pinning all their hopes on natural conception or IVF or, some way with their own eggs. And they are willing to do donor egg, which means that I know, in my program, I've had patients who come to me after 4 failed donor egg cycles and they get pregnant because we've figured out all the upstream causes of that issue and solve them and address them. And of course, then they go on to have beautiful babies. But the thing about it is that I am very transparent with people. When I assess cases, if I don't think that I can really be of benefit, or if I don't think that this is going to be a good thing, sometimes people join my program because they want closure. And then that's a different conversation, right? And of course, then that's a different pathway and a different conversation. But for the actual purposes of who I can help, they have to have the raw materials, functional, because otherwise it's just, I don't want to make people feel like they're going to get some kind of result when it's highly improbable. And in those situations, if it's highly improbable, because now we've been doing this so long and we've got so much data and we've been able to create predictive models to be able to compare patients who are incoming with patients who have been through the program. So we can actually predict with much more confidence. The confidence interval is becoming smaller and smaller in terms of like who we can help and who we can't. And so it just becomes an easier conversation, because having the ability to make those comparisons, I can say truthfully to somebody, look, I think this is likely to happen, or I don't think this is likely to happen, and these are the reasons why. So that's why I do that. And really those are the people. Like there's very few people that categorically are not a good fit. I'll tell you who is categorically not a good fit. People who are not willing to do the work. Categorically not a good fit.
Sure. You have to be on board, right?
So I've had people come to a consult smoking in the car, and I'm like, all right, we're not going to talk about fertility today. We are going to talk about your need to quit smoking, especially in an enclosed car. So
I bet they're like, I'll do anything, but you're like,
oh my God, how many times do I hear this? And people, as they're smoking or, drinking wine, and I'm like, okay, those things are incompatible. So
yeah. And
let's start
you have
again.
to have the husband on board. I mean, I
Yes,
have seen that with
you
clients
see-
before. The wife is willing to do all the things, and the husband is like, I'll do everything except give up my weed at night or my beer at
gosh,
night.
like look, it's interesting because like these are really, there's so many layers to these conversations, and I think that the first thing is this: I believe fertility is a team sport. Reality of the matter is that you have right now inside of you 50% of the little baby you want to create, full stop. So if you are not taking care of that 50%, and that contribution, which is 100% of your contribution to the couple 50%, is going to be lackluster or playing poor, you're letting the team down. Like, that's just how it is. Right. So if you're not going to go get tested, if you're not going to intervene on making change that is an improvement, because not all change is an improvement, like we said earlier, if you're drinking, smoking, taking drugs, doing whatever, and you think that taking your antioxidants is going to help you, like, you're dreaming, right? And so we need to focus on change that is an improvement. And this is why, like the Fertility Challenge, which is the free program that I run and have run for the last 15 years, exists, and I continue to run it, and I continue to be so devoted to it, because it is a 14-day event where people learn all of the things that they need to understand about optimizing their fertility. It's everything I talk about in Act Pregnant Now to Get Pregnant Later. It's about the strategic, the tactical things that you can implement, put in place, and you learn. And I don't, this is not about buying supplements or doing none of that. I, in fact, don't talk about supplements. You will never see me prescribing supplements anywhere online. Like, that's just, for 25 years, I have never done it, and I never will, because I don't think that that is not the pathway for people to really transform, have deep transformation of their results when things haven't been straightforward. But the education, the understanding of, right, what is it that you need to put in place? The big rocks is critical, because if we don't know those things, and sometimes we don't know, sometimes we want to pretend we don't know. And so what the Fertility Challenge does is it actually brings the evidence and evidence-based information so that you know. And then that way, exactly. And then that way people can go, all right, what is it that I need to do? But you see, taking a step back and looking at that, 50% of the equation. And if we think about the fact that, when people ask me, so tell me in a highlight reel, how do you improve your fertility? Act pregnant now to get pregnant later. It's really that simple. It's like, people just need to internalize this. Everything that you would do, and this applies to both partners, right? So if you are a male and you are nurturing the little baby that you want to create, i.e. your sperm, that you are going to contribute as 100% of your side of the equation, you see, that is already your baby in potential. And so if you were gestating a baby, if that was possible, we probably would have even smaller population than we have now. But jokes aside, imagine men trying to have babies. That would be like, I always laugh, and I'm not being mean, guys. Like, if you're listening and you're a man, like, we just have to call it as it is. Yeah. The videos on social media of the dudes, wearing the electric shock things, pretending to be a period, that doesn't go well for you guys, but that's a whole other thing,
Funny story yesterday. I don't remember what my husband and he was telling me how he's like, do you remember when you were a kid and you would get in fist fights and your shirts would get stretched out? I'm like, fist fights? I've literally never been in a fight in my life.
No.
And I was like, I think that's a boy thing. And I was like, but that's a good reminder that I'm really happy I'm a girl. And he's like, yeah, have fun with your periods. I was like, I'm still happy I'm a girl.
Yeah, exactly. But that's precisely. Exactly. You see, because imagine men trying to have babies like that. But anyway, we digress. Yeah. Let's focus on the conversation at hand, which is 50% of that little baby you want to create. And if you were gestating that child, what would actually happen is that all of the things, it's so funny. When I ask men, tell me, what are the things that you think your wife should be doing or your partner should be doing if she was pregnant right now? My God, they have a laundry list long of things, that she should be sleeping well, she should be exercising, she should be eating well, like the list is long. I say, you are 100% right. You have a gold star, and so do you have to be doing those things right now. And so, that really is what it boils down to, is that you are preparing the environment within both of you to be able to create the healthiest possible egg and sperm. Because you see, contrary to what has become popular on the internet, fertility does not start with the egg. The egg is an end result of multiple biochemical pathways that end in a milestone of reproduction. It's an end result. That's the egg. So is the sperm, right? And so what happens is there are multiple biochemical pathways that precede it. There are many things that happen before you get to the egg. And the egg, mind you, there's this big misconception that, it takes 3 months for the egg to improve egg quality, or that, for the egg to mature, or whatever it is. But here's the thing. It actually takes 12 months. An egg, women are born with all the eggs we'll ever have. From primordial follicle to primary follicle takes about 6 months. From primary follicle to ovulatory follicle takes approximately another 6 months. So the egg that you ovulate in this cycle has actually been maturing for the last 12 months, not the last 3 months, not the last month. This is a long event. Okay. Yeah. And so what happens is your AMH levels is a reflection of what was happening for months. Today's AMH, what was happening for months before now. And so when people are like, oh, but your AMH is low and you have to hurry and all of this, hang on a second. That process happens very slowly, right? Of like you utilizing and recruiting all of your eggs and all of that. So if AMH is low and FSH is still normal, it means that you still have time. And so this is one of the things. The last 4 months of development, the sperm matures pretty quickly, like it takes about 3 months. So for the last kind of like 120 days, that's how long it takes for every one of your red blood cells to be brand new in your body. So your body's constantly regenerating. So of course it makes sense to be nurturing the system, to be nurturing your body through how you eat, how you sleep, how you exercise, how you do all of the things that you do. The things that you avoid are as important, right? The toxins, the chemicals, all of the exposures that you have in your day-to-day. And of course, the last 3 to 4 months, the egg and the sperm are both most susceptible to improvement or damage. But this is a starting place only. Because most people are like, oh, I'm going to do all of these things and I'm going to improve my egg quality in a month. It's like, yeah, no. So you're going to have to only start. And the same thing applies for the sperm. You're going to start and you stop. Well, once you have a baby, you probably want to be around to take care of that child and raise that child and have quality of life in the long term. So I think that there's only really a start point, you know.
Yeah, you want to be healthy for a long time.
Yeah.
Can you share real quick for our audience, if anyone's not familiar with AMH, what it is, what it means, what number we are looking for?
Yeah, so the numbers, they vary because they change with age. But basically, AMH is anti-Müllerian hormone, and it's produced by the Teca cells in the ovaries. So, essentially, the follicles produce AMH. And so what ends up happening is that the more AMH you have, the more, supposedly, the bigger your ovarian reserve. But what can also happen in PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, which helps, kind of one of the things that happens with PCOS is that you get irregular cycles and you get anovulatory cycles. AMH increases. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's because somebody has a bigger ovarian reserve. It actually often is because of the increased inflammation. There's a lot of follicles recruited, but they are trees and they don't develop into actual eggs. And so what ends up happening is that you have this rise in AMH because there's a lot of follicles, and a lot of inflammation, but not actually enough quality eggs being released at the end of that whole process. And so that AMH is really a proxy marker for ovarian reserve. Ovarian reserve is the pool of eggs that women are born with. And, ultimately, you can't change your ovarian reserve. So, sometimes people are like, oh, but I want to improve my AMH. No, that's not possible. Okay. What you can do is you can improve the quality of the eggs remaining. You can't change ovarian reserve. You can't. So sometimes, people will start doing interventions and, AMH varies throughout the cycle as well. So that's something that happens in the beginning of the cycle. It will be more baseline reading. Towards the middle of the cycle, AMH increases. So if you're testing,
can you test any time as long as you know what day? No. Okay.
No, you're best to test baseline, which, with FSH, LH, AMH, you're best to test at day 2 of the cycle. So that way, that is the most accurate baseline, the cleanest baseline. Because if you test it at any time, you're going to have functional changes based on what's happening in the menstrual cycle. And then that's not going to be accurate information. That's just going to be noise. But one of the things that often happens is people will test either in different labs or different days of the cycle. They will get differential results and they will go like, oh, my AMH has improved. Okay, that's no. Yeah. There is normal variation that happens because of testing at different labs. They may test differently. They may use different tools and they may use different guidelines. And so you have a different result to, and also there's different measures that, in the US, there's a different measure, which is nanomoles. And in the UK and Australia, it's picomoles, nanograms, in the US. And picomole in Australia and UK. So it's different. And picomole is a much higher number than nanogram per milliliter. And so basically what ends up happening is that people sometimes also are not actually looking at the right measurement. And they think, oh, my AMH has improved. It's like, it doesn't improve. There is a conversion formula that you would use. And, pretty much, we always report in nanograms per milliliter just because that's how we did our original analysis. That's what we always, and a lot of the research is actually done on nanograms. So, it's just easier to kind of like keep. And so when you ask what is normal, 1 to 4 is a normal range, technically. And I say technically because you see at a younger age, say at 26, your ovarian reserve, your AMH levels are typically higher than they are at 36 or 46. Okay. So that's essentially the difference. And so at 1 to 4, if you are, say, a 40-year-old, if you have an AMH of 1, that might be a really good reading. But if you are 20 and you have an AMH of 1, that's a very bad reading. Sure. So when we say 1 to 4 being the normal range, it's age dependent.
Relative.
Got it.
Okay, so that's where people need to kind of like say, okay, how does this actually correlate to my age right now? and my result right now to be able to find what is an optimal range for that particular reading. So, if somebody at, 40 has an AMH that is above 4, typically it's because of PCOS, that kind of inflammation and, multiple follicles that we talk about, as opposed to being because of a very large ovarian pool. Even though, that can happen, but it's more unlikely.
The context is so important. How else
Context
would
is
you
very important.
assess for that inflammatory burden? Are you just looking at general inflammatory markers, or are you looking at more of a PCOS picture?
Yeah, so all of the above. And of course, the inflammation, we obviously need to assess with inflammatory markers. And of course, we want to be as precise as possible. So, and we also are looking at things like insulin resistance, because for a lot of people with PCOS and really implantation failure, it's astounding how little focus is given to insulin resistance and implantation failure, and undiagnosed insulin resistance and implantation failure. I see so many people who have multiple failed IVF cycles. I go and do a 2-hour glucose tolerance test. Their insulin levels at 30 minutes are like through the roof. Anytime that you have insulin levels above 10 in a GTT, you have insulin resistance. You may even have diabetes, but you certainly have insulin resistance. And so with that being that information, you need to go, okay, what do I need to do? Because insulin resistance will impact directly implantation and increase the risk of implantation failure. And so,
your body and your life,
100%.
For the rest of your life, all of your health issues.
Yeah.
And look, by the time you have insulin resistance, and there's some really interesting studies that show this, by the time you have insulin resistance, it's about 5 years until you develop prediabetes. It's about 5 years until you develop diabetes. So insulin resistance is not a joke. Right? It's not something that should just be like, oh, it's okay. Like you have insulin resistance. Insulin resistance, you should be like sounding sirens,
Yeah.
And most of the time, and this is another thing that I also I think that it doesn't get the airtime that it really deserves, because a lot of times these days, 2026, people are like, oh, if people should, oh my God, the other day, me on Instagram. Me on Instagram these days, girls, I can't tell you. Like, I have to take deep breaths all the time now. But the funniest thing, somebody was posting something about midlife, and I said, and women should really take better care of themselves as well throughout every stage of life. And then this one woman goes and posts, and women should do whatever they want. They should live life however they want. And I reply back and I say, okay, yes, until you are sick and other people are making decisions for you.
Yeah.
Mic drop.
Yeah.
No, seriously. Okay. You get to make your own decision for your life and your health, but don't be stupid.
Don't be stupid. So here's the thing, and this is the point, right? Is that you see these massively overweight women. You want to live your life, you want to be massively overweight, you want to be obese. You know what? I have no judgment of you as a person and a human being. That's perfectly fine. But what the research shows is that you can have metabolically normal markers for about 10 years of being massively overweight, and you will be quote unquote healthy. But that is the cutoff point where then health deteriorates drastically and you develop metabolic disease. Yes, so understand very clearly that your body's giving you signals. It's giving you signs. If you are overweight, it's something that you need to manage, especially if we're talking about fertility, especially if we're talking about longevity and good health. Because if you don't manage, it will be managed for you in the way that you will develop diabetes. Diabetes can, lead to all sorts of other disease conditions that are going to kind of crop in and crop up, right, in your life, and that you're going to have to manage. So it's like you choose what you manage. You're either going to manage your health now or you're going to manage disease later. There's just, and one of the things that I look at when I talk about fertility is this long-term quality of life piece, because I know for a fact, and there are studies that show this, women and men, there were two different studies that showed that women diagnosed with infertility had in a 10-year period after the diagnosis, had an increased risk of all-cause mortality because of an infertility diagnosis. Now, if you, and men had the same. So this was all-cause mortality from cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and cancers. And why is this? Very simple. Exactly that process that I just described. Insulin resistance develops into prediabetes, which impacts different aspects of how your body operates. There are so many cancers that we now understand are insulin driven, right? There are blood sugar regulating dysfunctions. And so, the system is a complex network of systems. And so if we don't approach it that way, we're going to end up with a situation that we think we are using IVF to bypass a problem that is literally just going to cost us a bigger problem down the track. So my idea about, preventing the use of IVF by optimizing health first is not about not using IVF as a tool, sure, but optimize, maximize, and really ensure that health is a priority prior to embarking on any kind of treatment. Because unless you do, you are literally leaving many chances on the table. You are certainly playing with odds that you are not going to win, and you are going to decrease your quality of life in the future. And who knows, are you even going to be around to raise the children that you create? So those are important things that I think people don't quite think about when they're in the desperation of, I have to be pregnant yesterday. I really encourage my patients to take a step back, and often many of them are so ready to do that because they've been through horrific experiences and just really traumatizing and also just tiring, mentally, emotionally, financially, and they do need that kind of moment to take a breath. And so, but that really is what's required. It's like, take a step back, assess the situation, figure out what are the big rocks that we need to put in place. What are the things we don't know, because there's a whole bunch of stuff that your doctor should be testing and isn't. And unless you start to advocate for yourself, you are going to be in a situation where you are going to have no further information, no further understanding of what's going on in the inner workings of your body. And that will cost you quality of life in the future.
There's so much missed education. I see this. There's a coworker that's been trying to get pregnant for so long, and what they're missing is that metabolic health is mental health. It's the same thing. It's like fertility
and fertility.
Health.
Metabolic health is fertility. Yeah, 100%.
The same thing. So she's having trouble getting pregnant. She obviously has insulin resistance, and she walks into work with a large frozen iced Starbucks drink with whipped cream on top. How is the doctor not sharing that all of the mental and emotional turmoil, she's been through so much, it's been so traumatic, it's hard on her emotions and her body, yet no one has told her that drink is—
But Lauren, you are being unreasonable, Lauren. You're being completely unreasonable. A doctor has an hour of nutrition training in their entire medical training. Please don't be unreasonable.
My fertility doctor told me nutrition has nothing to do with your fertility.
Okay, so this is where
those exact words from her mouth.
You see, Walter Willett, he was the chair of the nutrition department at Harvard Chan School of Public Health. And he was one of the originators of the nurses cohort, which is the largest cohort that studies nutrition across multi-generations. And most of the things that we know today, salt being, not good for cardiovascular health, saturated fats being bad for health, omega fats being good for health, etc. Most of those things we know because of his work. Okay, so he was one of my professors. I did a nutritional epidemiology concentration at Harvard, and I have a lot of colleagues who are nutritional epidemiologists. And the job of a nutritional epidemiologist is to look at population level data, so massive cohorts and billions of data points, and associate and correlate what actually happens with what, and how things actually occur. There are thousands of papers published from the nurses cohorts and about nutrition, and at the very least, I think doctors should read those papers before they make such assertions that diet has nothing to do with fertility, with health, with this, with that. Because Jorge Chavarro, who's one of the, he's now the PI actually of the Nurses 2 cohort. He's now the chair of the dean. He's one of the deans for the faculty at Harvard Chan, and most of his research focuses on nutrition and fertility. And he's published hundreds of papers, and his team, they're probably up to the thousands now, on the correlations of diet, nutrition, and fertility. Now, here's what we know so far, 2026, about nutrition. Increased inflammation and increased inflammation happens because of the exposure to nutritional components. So whether we're talking about ultra-processed foods, sugar, saturated fats, all of those things hike up inflammation, right? So inflammation is directly contributable to negative outcomes when it comes to fertility, whether it's ovulation and anovulation, so inability to ovulate, and poor sperm count and poor sperm parameters in general, motility, morphology, etc., are all linked to these high levels of inflammation that come from these food sources that we are exposed to multiple times a day. Right? So for a doctor to say, anytime that a doctor says that things like nutrition doesn't improve your fertility, or a varicocele, or high DNA fragmentation means nothing for fertility, what that shows me is their ignorance and the fact that they're not actually reading the science that is being published, and that they don't know what they're talking about. And to me, when I hear things like that, I literally say to my patients, you know what? Unless they're performing a very specific function that we need, and we just keep them to operating that function, you need to change doctors. Because ultimately, if you are going to be treated solely by a doctor who doesn't read their own science and doesn't actually understand what is happening and how to improve your chances and your odds of taking home a healthy baby, at best, you're being treated by the wrong doctor. And that will cost you your chances of having a baby.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
that's when you run the other way, when you hear that.
Yeah,
honestly.
A lot of times people are just overwhelmed. They've been through a million things, like you said, and they're just sort of desperate, and they're just like,
and they don't know where to go.
Yeah,
and that's the thing, because most of the time it's going to be the same. It's just going to be, you go from one office to another, and they're all talking the same, and it's just like you literally have to get out of the system to get the help that you need, and even that is the Wild West, because you don't know, like there's the supplement people, So there's a lot of issues, but I think that people just need to educate themselves. They need to literally look for proven track records. They need to literally go, right, what is it? What makes sense? First of all, that's the key. And when you are overwhelmed, and I think, Lauren, you make a great point. When you are overwhelmed and you're exhausted and you're fatigued and you're tired and you're hurting and all of those things, you literally lose the ability to correctly assess situations and to really be able to make sometimes, decisions that are even in your best interest. And you fall susceptible to the sunk cost fallacy of I've already put in so much effort. I've already put in so much time, so much money, so much energy. I might as well just keep going.
Yeah.
And that's hard.
Yeah.
Well, I love what you said too, about just, it's almost a little bit common sense, just think through it. Before you end up down that rabbit hole, for me, IVF didn't make sense. And I came across this Chinese medicine doctor who said, in Chinese medicine, unexplained infertility doesn't exist. That there is no such thing. They said, if you're not getting pregnant, there's an imbalance.
There's a reason.
In the body. Yeah. And
Find it.
Until someone can explain why I'm not getting pregnant and why IVF is the solution, I'm not going to do it. And no one could. So, yeah. So
Yeah.
you think about it. Yeah.
Yes, so can we talk about these three big rocks that we're kind of getting to our time? I'm sure people have been waiting for the three rocks, and I think we need to look at this whole scope, because you mentioned people are not starting early enough. Like, we need to act pregnant now. I know so many people have done this crash course, 1 month before they try, or 1 month before they freeze eggs and embryos. But
Totally.
what are the three rocks we need to zoom out and start adopting now?
Look, I think the very first thing is diagnostics, proper diagnostics, really understanding how this works and what it is that people need to do. Like last year, it's been on my mind for literally decades, where I've been like, okay, I need to create something, because I got so tired of hearing people tell me, I've done all the tests, everything is normal. And I would ask them to give me the tests, and I would look at it, and I'm seeing two things. And I'm like, this is two tests. This is not everything, And so, and even this is not ideal. Exactly. And so I was like, you know what? I need to do something about this. So I ended up putting a course together that actually takes patients exactly through this, which is diagnostics, everything you need to know, exactly what needs to be done, and especially when it has been difficult. So it focuses on things like proper male fertility testing, because most men don't get tested properly. It focuses on implantation failure and what you need to know from a diagnostic perspective when you've had IVF cycles where you've had embryos, but then you've transferred them and you don't have a baby. Why? Right? So implantation failure is a very big point. And then the second is miscarriage and recurrent miscarriage. Because you see, in the general population, the expectation from a guideline perspective is that you have to have had 3 miscarriages before investigating further. And how somebody is investigated further is differential. There is no set guideline. And I'm going, oh my God. And this is why, from our patients' perspective, in our data, we drastically reduce miscarriage risk and rate because of that reason. Because if we actually go look for things, we address them, and of course then we don't have to deal with the miscarriage afterwards. So I wanted to put something together that was super easy and simple for people to consume, that was inexpensive, where they could just go, tell me what I need to test, tell me what the test results mean. Because, that's the one thing that ends up happening, is that most people will get results. They look at the reference range, they go, yeah, this is normal and it's fine. And it's not, and obviously not everybody can access our program. And so I was like, okay, how can I help people do that? So this is one of the things that I basically have put together that helps people really assess and understand that one piece, which is the first, are we screened properly? Are we diagnosed properly? Is everything that needs to happen properly? And of course, you can go to a doctor who is willing to do this with you and get that done. But this is a good kind of peer review, of going, have I really truly had everything done? Let me check, right? So it's got trackers, it's got all these things. So that's the one thing that is a big, big rock. And, that couple that I said in the beginning that had been trying for 14 years, it would have never happened had they had something like this at the very outset, because they would have gone and had all of those tests done, and they would have found the problem, and they would have treated it, and they would have never had to go and done IUI or IVF, because they were perfectly fertile. They obviously had a very specific reason as to why, the sperm parameters increased to over 50 million after treatment.
Wow.
From 2 million.
Wow,
so it's
huge.
It really is not rocket science, people. It really isn't. But if you don't understand the problem, and this is the big rocks, is what is it that we don't know? And the first is diagnostics. The second is acting pregnant now to get pregnant later. All of the things that you must do to make sure that you are at peak health, in top shape, both partners, right? And the third is following on from that. Fertility is a team sport. If you're only going to address half of the equation, well, guess what? You're going to end up being able to influence half of your result. And you're probably going to still have no baby, right? So those are the big rocks. Really simple.
Love that. I love what the second one, do all the things that you would do if you're pregnant. I always think this is so interesting. Like when you're pregnant, don't eat fish high in heavy metals and don't drink alcohol and watch your exposure to toxins. I'm like, shouldn't we all be doing that?
Why are heavy metals okay if you're not pregnant? Yeah, it's so crazy.
Yeah.
I have a lot of friends that are freezing eggs right now. Because actually in my work industry, insurance started covering it, which is amazing. And I had this friend, she was like, well, if you want to do it, you gotta get on these supplements right now. And I'm like, you don't think I live my life like this? Like it's a lifestyle. It can be a lifestyle, but a lot of people don't live that way. And it is like, I gotta hurry up and like get all the things in check.
Hurry up and get healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually, I do, as I mentioned before, I do a lot of patient education on Instagram on Gabriela Rosa Fertility. And what I often do, if you go onto my account, you will find you have to scroll past lots of me in there. But once you do, there are certain posts that I make. They're all kind of like a cream white front. And those are all mini literature reviews on specific topics. They're all fully referenced. And one of the ones that I did was actually on egg freezing. And there is a resource that is attached in that as well about it's a decision tree on wow and how. On how and how to prepare for retrieval, how to prepare if it is actually worth doing, if it's not, because there are certain times that it's not really that helpful, and there are certain times that it could actually be helpful. And then how do you go about deciding that, how many eggs you need at different ages and stages and blood levels. So, that's something that it's a completely free resource that people can find. Egg freezing is on the title. I just forget exactly the thing, but it's on my Instagram account. So yeah, people can go and get that.
Pull that and make sure that is in the show notes. That's excellent. I can't wait to read it myself.
Same.
Awesome.
Oh. Same. I haven't really gone down that rabbit hole. So, well, speaking of your Instagram, I do want the audience to know that we have a lot of amazing resources from you. Everything from like your Facebook, Instagram, website, podcast. So everyone make sure you scroll down in the show notes so you can find all that. Lauren will find that post to make sure that's clear in there. But Gabriela, final question for you. What would you recommend our audience starts doing today to optimize their health? It can be fertility focused or it can be general, but something to do today.
I can't deviate from getting enough sleep. I think that it's so underestimated, the power and the healing capability of sleep. Like it's such a pharmacy in its own right. So I actually, one of the things that I do in my life that has been consistent for my entire life is that I don't organize my life around fitting in all of the things that I could do in my day to day. And I have multiple degrees. I run a business. So, there's a lot of things that I could be doing if I wanted to. I actually optimize my life for getting enough sleep. So I get up at very early in the morning between, kind of 4:30, 5 o'clock is usually the time that I'm getting up. By 8 p.m., you don't talk to me. I will be in my bed and I don't want to hear about you or your problems or, I might cuddle children and that's pretty much it. But, by 8:30, I'm pretty much going to be sleeping. By 9 o'clock, you can be sure that I'll be well on my way. And for my sleep to be interrupted, it has to be something seriously important. I typically I'll organize going for lunch or going for walks or going for breakfast and all of those things as opposed to going out at night and going for dinner. And, that's just how I live my life. Like you were saying, Lauren, don't you think this is how I live my life? That's how I live my life. I optimize for quality sleep. That's how I live my life. So that's what I recommend.
I'm with you. Best advice. That is the number one. I feel like non-negotiable. You can't argue.
Yeah.
But that's not the most important.
Yeah. Well, if you lived in Vegas, we would definitely be friends because I like to eat dinner around 4:30 if possible.
Oh my God. When I had kids, that was the most beautiful thing in my life was the full permission, and nobody needs this, by the way. You don't need to have kids to have this permission. I give you the permission. Have dinner by 5 p.m. Be done with dinner. That was for me. It was the best thing. This is great.
Yeah, I definitely feel my absolute best when I keep it early as possible.
For sure, absolutely. So that's my tip right there.
Great. Perfect. Well, thank you for so much education and information and empowerment that so many women need. And we're going to send them to your website, to your Instagram. If someone wants to work with you, is there an easy way to find?
Yeah, they can DM my team on Instagram, or they can go to my website, which is fertilitybreakthrough.com. So it's a long spelling word, but if you Google my name, Gabriela Rosa, Gabriela, 1L, Rosa, you will find me somewhere, somehow, for sure.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Excellent.
you're in all the places.
I'm in all the places, yeah.
Wonderful.
All right.
Well, thank you so much. We're just so honored to have this conversation with you today. Thanks for the time.
Thank you for having me. It was so much fun.
Yeah, and thanks to everyone that tuned in. We will see you next time.